Yes, of course. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Ah, thank you. So we talked a lot today about mechanisms or kind of vehicles, whether it's a new institution or even just a specific process for providing sustainability or security support in the open source and open technology ecosystem. So I wanted to start off by asking you all, do you think that we should be building new things, or do you think that we should be trying to reform what already exists? There's a lot of ideas out there, things like an EU sovereign tech fund, you know, new bodies that we can do. So where should we be starting in terms of thinking about how we kind of diversify the support that we provide in terms of sustainability and security for open source software projects or open technology projects in general? Anyone want to start off? Yeah.
Well, in the case of the EU STF, it's developing something new for an old problem. And the reality is, like lack of systemic investment in maintenance of open source has languished for several decades. No one actor has necessarily stepped up and say, I have a responsibility, I'm going to invest in this. And when actors have done so, it's been very siloed and often focused on their own strategic priorities. That may be more of a corporation doing it on a short-term project. That is starting to change with the German STF, but the reality is we do need some institutional reinvigoration and innovation in this space to address issues that haven't been addressed before.
Can I?
Yeah, turn it on.
Hello. Yay. No, I just wanted to add that I think it's important that we use what's out there, find what's working, replicate what's working, and then fill in the gaps with what's needed. I mean, as you propose, an edict could be what is needed to like coordinate and organize. But then, I mean, institutions like the Sovereign Tech Agency, and I mean, there are other examples of funding out there, like the Prototype Fund also in Germany. And then there are industry collaborations like Alpha Omega, and there are more specialized funds like the Open Tech Fund, OTF, and yeah, there are many different examples out there in terms of funding, but it's also finding. So I talked about OS2, a municipal association, like finding models that work. I mean, they are one model in terms of how local governments can collaborate and achieve a sustainable level for their projects, and can also be a channel for maintenance funding. So I think, again, find what works, replicate it, and then try to make it all work together.
Okay, I'm going to say we should do both. Yes, while we are trying to build something new, we should also sustain some of the initiatives that are already there, make them better, improve them. So yeah.
I'll second that, and then second a lot of what was said by the others. I think the thing I always say when I'm talking to people about like creating new projects and open source is like, how about you build on what's there? And it's really important to identify what's there first before you start to build a new thing. And I do think that there's structures. And if I look specifically at our research, I think there is structures. For instance, if we're talking about creating the international standards, there are structures there. There are things there. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel. Maybe we just need to coordinate better, and there may be a coordinating body or like impetus at some point that needs to be, I don't want to say new, but at least rethought, and the groups that are working on the thing get together and coordinate together. So I think that's maybe the only new thing I would think of, because yeah, I do agree, and there is a lot already there that just needs to maybe be recognized and made sure that they're working together and not apart or in parallel, and not realizing that they're all doing the same thing or something along those lines. So
Steph, can I double click on that? That's the only new thing we need. Open source has everything in it already. We've built this institution for 50 years. It all exists. We don't have the coordination infrastructure to coordinate it. And you spoke to Emily Lovell, right? Something she's putting together, and I tried to help, ran out of capacity. I didn't know that was possible, but she's connecting all the different mentorship programs, or trying to, a bunch of them, so that they work together, because it turns out there's a lot of different mentorship programs to bring youth on board, and they were facing the same problem but not talking about it. So we need new coordination mechanisms, new coordination infrastructure.
One thing I was reflecting on is that a lot of these mechanisms seem set up to support projects or institutions or communities rather than simply supporting people. So how do you all think about that kind of dynamic in terms of how we can better invest in and support human resources, developer resources, the actual people that are already doing the work that we all depend on?
Build an endowment where they have control.
Good answer, John. Fund the EU Sovereign Tech Fund.
Yes.
Johan, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, there are examples. There are proven business models in setting up like service supplier models. Like Daniel Stenberg, he's been working on this for a long time, trying to be able to work. I mean, the whole world is using his projects, but he's barely now on the level to where he can be sustained through assignments through a Wolf SSL, a consultancy in the space. So we need more maintainers to start using this support model, and I think there are a lot of infrastructure to lower that barrier, but even more we need to make the demand for these and the awareness of these services, so that people actually start procuring the services from these individuals. Yeah, there are different ways.
To put a fine point on that, we work with Daniel through the Open Source Academy, the European Open Source Academy, and he's one of the 5 or 10 most important open source software developers, and he's still crowdfunding for his developer laptop. There's a structural problem there. Sorry, Stephanie.
Oh, no problem. I agree with what both of what colleagues up here are saying, but also that I really, your paper on the sovereign tech the EUSF, thank you. I thought really resonated with me on ways of dealing with that. I mean, when I was going, yes, I actually wanted to use it also towards, because I also showed, it was like showing a lot of the value of why like big structures should be helping support this, be it governments or in my case university. But I think we can't ignore the fact that there are large industry making money off of the backs of our open source maintainers, and that they need to, and I know there are a number of companies and people I work with in industry that are great open source parts of the open source community, and I think they're trying to kind of pay back and make sure, because it's important to them. It's not necessarily just because they're great people. They also see it as a business interest. And I think that needs to be combined in with some of the the government as well. So it's kind of what I was saying, that government can't be the only thing trying to secure open source. It needs to be all parts of open source, and I think the industry should be a lot more involved in that, I think, as well.
I guess I was just going to add that mentorship programs like the great work Emily's doing, that Jonathan talked about, where it's not only about getting financial compensation, which is really important, but also a point of contact and explicit invitation into a community that really sustains those long-term ties. And I think there are other ways of still keeping the volunteer aspect of open source while still also making sustained participation easier, particularly for people coming from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So travel grants for conferences like this, open source conferences, perhaps daycares at these conferences. There are ways of making these events more inclusive and accessible for people.
And just wanted to add, I remember that we did a paper on this actually, me together with Georg Link and Kevin Lombard from the Chaos Project, where we actually interviewed maintainers on their various needs. And first off, the economic part in finding different business models, and then the service consultancy was one model, but many of them highlighted that they just getting the time from their employers to work on their projects, because a lot of the development is happening by developers who are hired by someone to work on products and services, but being allowed to provide a certain time of their time, of the work time to spend on the project is a big thing. Another thing which I think is maybe more important too, we're talking a lot about funding the maintainers, but what came out of the interviews is really what they are. So receiving grants and whatever, I mean, that's important, but social benefits, that was really highlighted. I mean, dental insurance, health insurance, a lot of the maintainers, if they receive donations, it's more of a coffee money, or they can do some parts of it, but just having this social security, that was really like top 3 of the things that they would really benefit of, and that would really remove a lot of stress for them in terms of being able to focus more on the projects.
Can I ask a question to that? What's the difference between receiving health insurance and as a benefit and being paid enough money to buy health insurance?
Yeah.
So
but then it's about how much you get paid.
Yeah, they should get paid full salary.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
But
it's two different in some cases.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've got a small point to add on inclusivity and outreach. I was speaking to someone recently who described this problem when it comes to identifying which projects to maintain and which not, as like the exotic superfauna. Like there are some projects that are more visible, some naturally get more attention, some are better keyed into like these funding opportunities that pop up. So when it comes to having funding and maintenance opportunities down the line, like how can we conduct that outreach to maybe more sole maintainers, or projects that aren't necessarily as polished and like photo ready as others, to give them the support that they desperately need?
You want to say one thing and then I'll go to the audience? Yeah.
Yeah, there's a development push to, so the theory behind the development push is that it's going to be very difficult to convince people to fund projects that are not sexy. So don't try. So make the sexy projects capable of identifying the less sexy projects. So money comes in. I don't like using the term sexy project, but I'm in a hole now. So make the money comes into the sexy project, then gets dripped down or distributed through the graph to the hidden projects, the dependencies, and then you can add, once you get that dependency graph funding down, and this is a technical solution and it kind of works already, you can add like a second tree, a side tree to your dependency tree, where it's like, I like this project. So if my project gets $100,000, you know, I keep 50,000, 40,000 goes to my dependencies, 10,000 goes to my happy projects that I have in a little garden that I like to foster. And I think that's
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So what doesn't that make the less sexy project heavily reliant on the very sexy one?
It makes it reliant on being used. So the thing that makes a project sexy is that it's used by a lot of people somewhere. It's an application layer.
Yeah.
And if you have a deep dependency project that maybe I find fascinating personally, and it's not used by anyone to do anything of value, maybe it shouldn't exist. I don't know. I think there's an element of pruning the tree ultimately too. Like, it's a good question. It's good. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to take some questions from our audience. I saw Felipe's hand first, so I'm going to go to him.
Hi. Well, thanks for the presentations. They were great. I'm a bit concerned with the graying that Hannah mentioned. And on another kind of topic, I wrote a bit about what I feel that there is kind of our generation, kind of climate anxiety, a younger generation that is now 22, 23, that is climate rebellion, and what I'm identifying in my teenage daughter as climate fatigue, and a sense of hopelessness that is supposedly emerging. And I wonder if that's not also connected to that. When I started my project as a media activist and kind of open source ethos, we were hopeful that that was a response to a lot of problems in the political scenario, me and a lot of other people. And I wonder if that's not something similar happening, and that people, young people, lose trust that the world can be made better by adopting and dedicating time to open source. And a perhaps separate question is also if there isn't there something that is like too much money for startups, too much money for high-paying jobs that will attract some kind of people, but not to do open source? And because I think the high salaries of IT careers in Berlin are a problem for the city for many reasons, gentrification and all that. And maybe that also has an effect of attracting people that are there for the money and not because they think they can change the world. And just a mention to the DRIPS network, I don't know if anyone heard about it.
I work with them. Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I think this tension showed up a lot where there's definitely a sense of despair and dread with the state of the world, especially, these new developers they've been sold this promise, especially coming from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, that if you study computer science, you get a job as a software engineer, immediate social mobility, and our education system has adapted to that. So we've been pushing CS programs, and we've been trying to pull these students into these areas. And now that these jobs are sort of drying up, students are very afraid, and they see open source as a way to relieve some of those fears. They see it as a way to make themselves more competitive in comparison to peers who maybe aren't contributing, don't have these public profiles. And so of the alumni that I spoke to, a good chunk of them were coming from lower socioeconomic backgrounds where they had another job while they were attending school, and they had this tension, and they were really motivated by humanitarian open source. They loved contributing to projects that had a social good message, but also there was this tension at the end of the day. I need to eat, I need to find a job, I need to pay off these student loans. And yeah, that's what I was saying. I don't know if there's an easy answer for it right now, but yeah, it definitely aligns with what you were saying.
Your research, you're kind of mentioning it, but also so I do a lot of community organizing in Vermont, and there's a local tech agency that finds people in the local community who need technical solutions for some project that affects the community immediately, and people love contributing to them because it's local. They might be exasperated on the state of the world, but they see this effect in their local environment, so they feel like they have agency at that point. So that's really helpful. And to your second point, yeah, probably. But is it? We're in a really bad situation, so we gotta. I have faith that the open source community has strong enough principles and values and enough people to back them that we can stop when we need to stop. Yeah. So I'd rather us try to bring money into this space and maybe go a little too far for a little bit than have that situation that you were just describing.
I was having a conversation with Claire Dillon, who runs an open source network in Ireland recently, and she works a lot with University OSPOs, and she was saying that students, they often engage with open source projects because thematically there's something that draws them in that aligns with their values, like it works with humanitarian aid or human rights, environmental sustainability. But there is often that pipeline and dropout, after they finish a project, or maybe they need to go out into the world and get a job. That's where where engagement starts to drop off. So it's a very important question in terms of sustainability of open source about how we can retain those individuals. And I wanted to bring this back to the maintenance point because disillusionment and concern is often compounded by systemic issues such as burnout. So if you're not receiving funding and support for critical maintenance, then that could be yet another push factor that drives you out. There's certain pull factors that bring you in, maybe alignment with values, but it can be those more practical cost-related issues that force you out.
I want to follow on from that, but also I think Johan's point from earlier about the insurance and the social services kind of goes to the idea of if you start to frame this as public service, and that the people who are doing it are doing a public service, and then the idea that you under that, a lot of people do public service because they know it's not going to bring them more money than say going to industry, but there is a certain level of, aside from that you're doing something for your community, you have a certain level of a safety net. So I think that's exactly what I think what you were trying to say is that, and especially if coming from the U.S. perspective, where independent contractors who don't have insurance are pretty much screwed. So if you could create it as a public service and then allow for that type of that type of assistance to them, which is really, really, I think, important for them, as that has a social safety net. I think that would be a really nice way of dealing also with your point about it. The level of pay that they are getting, but maybe it is not actually contributing to their communities that they're directly involved in. So.
Yeah, I truly agree. I think I was having a conversation with someone here yesterday, and they mentioned that someone is managing a very important open source project, but then they have to work with MasterCard in order to be able to sustain that project. So it's just a matter of time, and that person will definitely give up, and that's an important project that is just going to go down the drain, or just stay there unmanaged, abandoned. So I feel like we need more resources to help people that are actually doing the work. And yeah, it could go both ways, in the sense that it could attract people that are just there for the resources and not actually getting to do the work. But then we don't want to look at that aspect, right? We really want to help people that are actually doing good work in the space, support them with the right resources to keep doing what they are doing.
I think we have time for another audience question. I saw Jan, Renata. Yeah.
Very quickly, at the Open Knowledge Foundation, I deal with developers that are very passionate on public interest. And one of the things that is different that I get from them, all of them are from developing countries. And one feedback that I receive on why do we need to build new things now instead of maintaining things is the logic behind many of the systems. The logic behind many of the systems built, as open source projects, but by very resourced institutions, is that once you want to localize it, it doesn't respond to the logic, to the needs and the resources that you have in a university in Costa Rica or in a hospital in Ghana. I don't know, and so the idea of building new is of building something that can be maintained, and we even publish a guide about it. It can be maintained by very few people. It doesn't need constant updates, and you can have some agency in localizing it according to, the language that you have, the devs available for, and so on. So I know that it is very different from what you were discussing, but it is, I wanted your opinion on that. Can open source open up to different logics than those in, Europe and the US?
So I'll be very quick. I think there's an application layer, which is what you're describing, should always be hyperlocal. Are you talking infrastructure, like deep infrastructure? Where do we store the data? That sort of thing? So infrastructure needs to interoperate across a global network, but an application needs to be hyperlocal. That would be my perspective on that. And so the new infrastructure needs to be very, very new, but I don't think that's what we were talking about before. If it was, then I misspoke.
Anyone else? Okay. Any other questions from the audience before we move on? Yes, John has a question.
Who brought up making open source popular, like among the general population? Someone in the, is that you? Can we do that? How? Yeah. So I find this event very annoying because there's always something I leave with that I'm like, let's just do that. Let's just do that. There's distributed computing infrastructure that worked really well with popularizing distributed computing. There's just got to be an equivalent for open source.
building on this and also what you said earlier about this being more or less sexy, I feel like there's a bit of a question: are we trying to save like code, or are we trying to save a movement? Because I feel like for like some of the tasks, like the maintenance of a software that was developed by someone who's now turned old, it's of course not really sexy. And I feel like a lot of the things, and I'm talking also from the perspective that has analyzed the open movement, including, for instance, people contributing to Wikipedia, it's like people had the feeling of being part of a political movement, and that made it exciting, and also of developing something new. And I feel like if you're talking to people and saying, oh, but do not reinvent the wheel and go like maintain this old thing that already exists out there, it's not really exciting if you are trying to build a political movement where people still engage as volunteers. So I feel like for these kind of tasks, of course, then it's more about bringing in governments and saying it's some kind of public service, or bringing companies to pay for this. But like if you really still want to support social change, and this like as a volunteer movement, I guess that means opening up to different political perspectives of people who are young now and who I don't think are only desperate, but I think of young people who have new political fights, who have new political imaginaries, who think about these issues in new ways. And I feel here I see a lot of gatekeeping in communities. And I'm thinking of the German Wikipedia community, for instance, who's aging a lot, and who I felt struggled a lot of actually engaging with these new political movements who have different worldviews. So I think like if you want to save this political movement and these volunteers engaging, it's a different conversation of just safeguarding in the maintenance of software code. And yeah, so these are a bit of two different questions, I think.
I was just saying, I think you could, I think it's somewhere in the middle, because I think that what you're saying is totally true. But my concern is always like, don't restart something that doesn't need to be rebuilt. But if there is an issue like what you're bringing up, then yeah, I mean, bringing in you can either bring new people into existing organizations and revitalize it that way, or see that this isn't working, sunset that, and do something new. For me, people redoing the same stuff that somebody else is doing, I feel like it's just a waste of resources. So more not consolidation, but more collaboration where you're building upon each other is what I was most concerned about. But what you're talking about is definitely true. If you're moving for like making it more of a political movement or a social movement, making sure people have ownership by being part of that, I think is really important. So I agree with you on that.
I just want to add really quickly on that point. So a lot of different, okay. So since Microsoft acquired GitHub, there's been a lot of tension where now big tech has direct oversight, surveillance into open source communities, and that's definitely a tension with the free software movement. And over the years, Microsoft has used their power to mess with open source in a way that wouldn't usually happen. And so something that I found quite exciting is this platform that's emerged sort of as a competitor. I mean, on their website, they explicitly say I forgot what their wording is, but basically we resist these capitalist overlords, sponsoring open source code. And it's called Codeberg, and right now it is, I believe, partially funded by the German government. And right now it is very local to Germany, and I was talking to somebody else about it. But I have talked to some people on it, and so first off, there's a lot of queer developers who are worried about their identities being, mined and their data being used, and so they love Codeberg for that reason. I was speaking to someone who on Codeberg was basically creating a direct competitor to Google Drive, but specifically for their local community in like a Republican area of South Carolina, I want to say, which was really cool. And so I think these political ideologies are shifting to new areas, and I think, it's a site for new inquiry. Let's follow these people, see what they do. I think there are sites for inspiration and joy.
Great. Well, I think we have to wrap up there. I'm very sorry, everyone. But we can continue the conversation over some snacks in just a few minutes. But please give a big round of applause once again to all of our panelists.